Hi guys, Dr. Gillard again. So this is going to be a review over stomach anatomy, physiology, and I'm not sure if we're getting into endocrinology in this yet or not. This is going to be probably a longer one, and you may not even need to do this one. I'm not going to probably test on a lot of physiology and anatomy, but you better understand. You probably better watch this because I don't think you've had stomach anatomy, physiology for a while. So, anyway, let's get started. Here we go. So, start stomach. Hopefully, you know what the stomach is. So, we're leaving the esophagus. Now we're in the stomach. It's the widest part of the alimentary canal. It's between the esophagus, duodenum, specifically the duodenal bulb. Uh, it's a place where mechanical and chemical digestion occur. The stomach is considered, great board question, is it intraperitoneal or is it extraperitoneal? Well, let's see, that most of the duodenum is extra. It's outside of the peritoneum, so isn't the stomach outside? No, it's actually inside. It's covered by peritoneum or peritoneum, tomatoes. That medical school I went to used peritoneum, and I just can't get it out of my brain. Um, anyway, so it's considered an intraperitoneal organ. Okay, just like I could ask a question on this. The abdominal portion of the esophagus. Who cares about if it's interperitoneal? Because if you get a rupture in interperitoneal organ, you can die really fast. You can get peritonitis, and that's very, very dangerous. So boards love this stuff, I'm sure. Even when I went to school, they drilled this into our heads. Abdominal esophagus is intraperitoneal. The bulb, the first couple centimeters, the duodenal bulb is intraperitoneal. Then the rest of the duodenum comes out of the peritoneum, then it dives back in the duodenal jejunal juncture or flexure. So the jejunum, the ileum, is also the cecum, the transverse colon. I guess I could add cecum in here. Oops, cecum, transverse colon. No, wait a minute. I'm going to take that out. Uh, the cecum is not. The ileum is, but then it pierces out. So the cecum and ascending colon are extraperitoneal. Remember, the ascending and descending colon pop out of the peritoneum. The transverse colon is dives back in. It's kind of weird, I know, but transverse colon is interperitoneal. The sigmoid colon is interperitoneal. Okay, you get the idea. The liver, the gallbladder. All right. Stomach. So pancreas, where's the pancreas? It's directly behind the stomach. So if you get a gastric ulcer that perforates, you can actually you can get gastric juice leaking onto the pancreas, and it can destroy the pancreas. It can cause peritonitis or pancreatitis, which we'll talk about later. Yeah. Because of its size, it actually occupies about three regions of the stomach. You know those regions: the left hypochondriac, the epigastric region, and the umbilicus. Do you remember those regions? We're going to do those in lab a lot. So here's a nice view of the stomach. You can see it right here. There's the duodenum, right there's a descending duodenum. There's that inferior portion, part 3, and part 4 goes up, and it's cut here. The jejunum would connect in right here. So this is stomach. Remember, we have what's this part? That's the fundus. This is the esophagus. So this part is called the cardiac region. The body is all of this stuff. Then we have the pyloric antrum, which is in this region here, and then the pyloric canal. And somewhere in here would be a thickening, would be that pyloric sphincter. That's the end of the pyloric canal. A lot of these books, pathology books and clinically, you don't say this is the pyloric antrum and the pyloric canal. This whole thing is just called the pyloric region of the stomach. Some people just call it the antral region of the stomach. So, and they don't, well, we'll see. I'm getting ahead of my slides, so let's stay on my slides. You definitely better know this, right? Right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant. We'll do this in the lab though. But there's the stomach. So it's in the left upper quadrant. Okay, you should know this as well, more specific. There's that left hypochondrium, chondriac. Say, let's see, uh, epigastric region, umbilical region, or umbilical region. We'll do that in lab. Stomach receives, of course, food in the form of a ball of food, a bolus, which is just chewed up. Here's another vocabulary word. Chewed up is macerated. Macerated means chewed up. Stomach receives this chewed up food in the form of a bolus. Drink is in the form of a liquid bolus. Food is in the form of a solid bolus, but it receives it from the esophagus. And then it churns and mixes it all up. It's got those same layers that we talked about with esophagus. It's got a lot of muscle in there. So there's a churning and mixing action that can occur. And then it makes it into this runny cream of wheat stuff called chyme. Chyme is what's injected into the duodenum. We'll talk about the duodenum later on. So here's another nice little picture. There's esophagus, there's your stomach, there's your duodenum. Okay, that anatomy coming back to you. And so we said this already. Intraperitoneal organs covered with visceral peritoneum. If it ruptures from an ulcer, you can develop peritonitis. That's one of my dragon naturally speaking problems. So you can get peritonitis if the stomach ruptures. Not a good thing, life-threatening condition. Visceral peritoneum covers the stomach, is interrupted in two places. So stomach's not completely covered. It's interrupted in two places by our friend, the greater and lesser omentum, at the greater and lesser curvature, respectively. Let's take a look at that. Remember that from Gross 2. Lesser omentum is up here, right? And then it connects to the lesser omentum connects. These have a separate ligaments, like the hepatoduodenal ligament. There's different pieces of that. And for boards, you better know that, but this is the lesser omentum here. Greater omentum is actually has four leaves, two folds, so it connects to the greater part of the stomach here. Greater curvature of the stomach goes down, and then it curves back up and connects to the transverse colon here. Okay, remember that's the cop. It actually can move and it can sense intestinal inflammation and stick to it and help with infection. Okay, so that's our stomach. A little bit of neurology about the stomach. Physiology too. More physiology, I think this is a better word for that. Stomach motility and gastric secretions are controlled by sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves, mainly by sympathetic nerves. Stomach also has a third nervous system called the enteric nervous system that's built into the stomach and the intestine, and we talked about that with the esophagus. So it's a third system. It can run independently too if it has to, but it's strongly influenced by the sympathetic and parasympathetic system as well. The enteric nervous system is made up of, there's two components. There's a submucosal plexus, and then there's a myenteric plexus. Submucosal plexus, also called the myenteric plexus. The myenteric plexus, Meissner's, did I say Meissner's? I'm getting tired already. Submucosal plexus is called Meissner's plexus. Myenteric plexus, aka is Arbach's plexus, and these live, the Meissner's plexus or submucosal plexus lives in the submucosal layer, really in between. We'll look at it in a minute. Arbach's plexus lives in the muscularis propria layer. Some AKAs for that one. Muscularis layer sometimes it's just called. We'll look at those AKAs. Here's a cartoon of the layers of the stomach. It's the very outer layers, the serosal layer. Then we have this two circular muscle. We have a longitudinal muscle here, and then under this longitudinal muscle lives Meissner's plexus, or the myenteric plexus, aka Arbach's plexus. There's circular muscle, so this plexus lies between the circular muscle and the longitudinal muscle. So that's Arbach's plexus. That's that muscularis layer. Then you go down to the submucosal layer. Between the submucosal layer and the circular muscle of that muscularis layer lives this submucosal. Submucosal means it's really kind of going away from the lumen. So this is the enteric, this two layers, two components of the enteric. Here's the mucosal layer. Here mucosal has an epithelium on it. It has a basal lamina that sits on. Then there is a muscle layer at the bottom. Muscularis mucosae is the very bottom of that. We'll look at these independently. There's a better picture perhaps. So you can go through that. I don't think I'm going to go through that. This is a great picture though. Okay, and you see vagus nerve comes in. It connects to both plexuses, mainly the myenteric plexus, but it does connect to the vagus nerve. We're going to talk about that more specifically, but there's some interconnection, but it has some, well, we'll look at these. We'll jump ahead of my slides. There's the regions of the stomach. We went over those already, but and now anatomists and histologists and pathologists don't agree on these regions, as we'll see. But anatomists, you know, fundus, Kardia is here, body of the stomach, pyloric antrum, pyloric canal, and the pyloric sphincter. True physiological sphincter, powerful. There is not one here. This is the lower esophageal sphincter. Cardiac orifice is here. And we talked a lot about this already in class. So a lot of times this whole region is just called the antrum of the stomach, or it's called the pyloric region of the stomach. Okay, there's another picture. Histologists or pathologists have a different view on things. So they base the region of the stomach on gland type, because the body of the stomach and the fundus of the stomach, because these two regions, they have the same type of glands. They call this whole region the fundic portion of the stomach. Then there's still a cardiac portion of the stomach, and this whole region is the pyloric portion of the stomach. Okay, you can read through that. Why? I don't know why. Simply because the fundic and the body of the stomach have I do know why. That's everything I said. They have the same type of stomach glands. I shouldn't say stomach glands. Let's change that to gastric glands. The AK would be stomach glands. Specifically, they have fundic glands, aka gastric glands. That's not an AKA, it's fundic glands. The AKA, that would be accentic glands. That's the AKA for fundic glands. We'll confirm that in other slides. Pyloric region of the stomach only has pyloric glands. Kardia doesn't. The cardiac region, I don't think I'm going to talk about it, just secretes mucus. Pylorus really secretes mucus as well. It's the main product, but it's got some hormones that we have to talk about. Here's another classification system. I'm not going to test you on it, but if you ever get into this stuff, some histologists and pathologists break it down in only two regions: accentic gland area and the pyloric gland area. And that makes anatomists flip out. Okay, stomach wall. Here's the official layers now. So going from inside to out, from the lumen where all the acid is and gastric juice out. First layer is the mucosal layer. Got some AKAs for that. Surface mucosa, gastric mucosa, mucosal surface, mucosal layer, accentic surface I've heard before. Okay, then we have a submucosal layer, submucosa. Then we have a muscularis externa, often just called the muscularis layer, where those two longitudinal and circular muscle fibers are. Some texts, a lot of texts, in fact, call it the muscularis propria. And then there's a serosal layer on the top. So, board stuff, you got to know that. Would I test you on that? Probably not. But you never know. Okay, everything we said. There's the mucosal layer, submucosal layer. Remember, the nerve plexus are right here. Submucosal nerve plexus, not drawn in here, but it would be right between these two layers. And then Meissner's would be right between here. Or no, my enteric plexus would be between this layer. The longitudinal and circular layers here. Okay. Let's look at the gastric. Now I'm a little more interested in this gastric mucosa, because you gotta understand a little bit of digestion in order to understand the hormones. So this is falling into my realm here. I don't want to make this a physiology class, but I do have to cover hormones. So gastric mucosa. It's the innermost layer. It's made up of 3 layers we'll look at. We talked about it already. And it usually doesn't have anything to do with food or nutrient for the most part, but there are some things absorbed, like water, salt, lipid-soluble drugs, alcohol can be absorbed here. If the surface, especially if the surface epithelium gets damaged, then you can start taking in NSAIDs, and aspirin and alcohol are absorbed much more readily when it's damaged by things like alcohol. So on an empty stomach, you see these folds like crazy we've seen in gross. We don't have a good stomach for that anymore, but I think you guys had the good stomach. You could see those rugae and those folds. Those are bunched up mucosa. If the stomach's completely empty, it actually, the submucosal layer actually gets involved with that. If you eat and eat and eat, you can actually push those rugae away. It can completely stretch those out. Here's a great picture. Here's an endoscopic view on a completely empty stomach. You don't see any food, and those are mucosa and a little submucosa, but those are the rugae. Remember, no rugae down in that pyloric region, right, or the antral portion of the stomach. They're only in the body and the fundus, tiny bit in the Kardia, but really not. Rugae, think body of the stomach. Or the, let's see. Okay, subdivisions, surface, we have a surface epithelium. That we've talked about that already. That is made up of columnar, simple columnar, a single layer of columnar cells without cilia, without goblet cells. Okay, a bunch of AKAs, surface mucosa, we went through these already. Then underneath the surface epithelium, you have the lamina propria. That's what these cells sit on. And then underneath that, there's a muscular layer. It helps a little bit with peristalsis, but it's not super strong. But that's the bottom. That's where the base of these gastric glands are going to sit, as we'll see. Okay, mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, same picture as before. Okay, surface epithelium cells. This is the innermost luminal layer again. It's made up of mucose cells, not mucus cells, mucose cells, aka sometimes they're called surface mucose cells, or an old aka is surface foliolar cells. That's might be a board still. It's been around for so long, but they're trying to get rid of that word. Classified as, again, simple columnar epithelium. It meets the esophagus. Esophagus has, again, stratified squamous, non-keratinized, and it meets at the Z-line, and that's called the squamocolumnar junction, and it's usually right where the lower esophageal sphincter is. Endocrinologists, pathologists usually categorize this layer into one of 2 types. So throughout the stomach, there's either oxentic mucosa, which contains oxentic glands or gastric glands, or not gastric glands, accentic glands or fundic glands. And then we have antral mucosa, which is in the antrum of the stomach, contains antral glands. Okay, surface epithelial category. So here we have, everything I just said. Accentic mucosa. So it's superficial epithelium which contains gastric or fundic glands. I don't like that word, gastric, because gastric means all glands in the stomach. So the accentic contains accentic glands or fundic glands. That one's better. Fundic, remember the fundic region of the stomach? It's the fundus and the body of the stomach. So this accentic mucosa is located in the fundus in the body of the stomach. Contains mucous cells, ECL cells, which are important. Histamine, with regard to histamine, they're called enterochromophene-like cells. Star. So you need to know some of these. Parietal cells and chief cells. We'll look at those. Contains enteroendocrine cells as well. We'll talk about. That's where endocrinology comes in. And then we have the other type of category of surface epithelium. There's antral mucosa. That's in the antrum. That's in the pyloric antrum region and in the pyloric canal. These contain lots of mucus cells. They contain gastrin secreting G cells, which are important. We'll look at the G cells and some other enteroendocrine cells as well. Some of them we're not going to look at. Surface epithelium covers the entire luminal surface of the stomach, as well as the gastric pits. It does not go down into the stomach glands or the gastric. You heard that word, stomach. It does not dip into the gastric glands. It's in close contact with the acid. Why doesn't it burn up with the acid? pH is 2, even lower than 2. How come they don't burn up? We're going to find out. Here is a gastric gland. This is actually an accentic gland or a fundic gland. So this means it's only found in the regions of the fundus and body of the stomach. That's where the accentic mucosa is. But here's the gastric pit right here. Still epithelium. And now we're in the actual gland itself. So the gland has an isthmus where the stem cell is very important. It has a neck, and then it has a base down here, or fundus. Muscularis mucosae would be right here. Submucosa would be underneath that. So this is all in the mucosal layer. Okay, we'll look at the parietal cells. This is a cool picture. There's some mucosal neck cells, not goblet cells though. There's the endocrine cell here, and the chief cells are down here in the bottom. It's a real picture of it from histology. Gastric pit. So let's talk about these, also called gastric crypts. Gastric pits almost always though. So at random intervals on the surface of the epithelium, you get these big invaginations into the luminal surface, and these are called the gastric pits. They're only found on the luminal surface of the stomach. Vaginations push right down into the lamina propria. The gastric pits are connected with the isthmus. So gastric pit is here. I guess I could have photoshopped this into a different color, but they're connected to the isthmus of the gastric gland. And we're talking about the accentic region. They're connected to the accentic gland. Okay, aka fundic gland. See how that works? Okay, and the gastric pits make up the surface of the epithelium. Okay, here you can see the pits on this picture. They look like little holes. We'll see an electron microscope here in a minute. This is a nice slide, shows the whole ball of wax here. Okay, here's what they look like under electron microscope. See, these are all the mucose cells, the top of the mucose cells, all these little things. And here's the gastric pits. There's one there, one there, one there. The amazing mucose cell. I wonder if we should stop here. We finished? I think we've stopped. It's 25 minutes. No, let's just keep this. No, I better stop this. Let's stop it right here, and then we'll talk about the amazing mucus cell and the gastric, because now we're getting into more pathology stuff. So let's stop it here and we'll pick it up.